Hi, this is Joel Salatin, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show. Welcome.
But you are a fascinating dude. So just a little background for you, so you and I can have a conversation at the right level. I used to be a spy, and I used to run around Iraq in Baghdad province, and out in the country in Baghdad province, it's all farmland out there. So they got fish farms. They're growing all kinds of crops, and we had a very Western way of looking at farming that didn't jive with how these farmers from an ancient land farmed. And so what I learned from farmers was to shut up and listen to them because they had the experience with that land, with the techniques, and they knew exactly where they needed help. And so when I saw your stuff when you talk about regenerative farming, man, it was like lighting church and candles in my church. I love your approach to it and how you can describe how you can take the land and really work collaboratively with it to get a higher yield, healthier food, etc. So thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate that, and I can't wait to talk about farming with you.
Absolutely. Well, it's my pleasure.
So I was in Iraq. I was looking at the farming thing, right? Because we're trying to improve the condition of farmers. And I would go to the chicken farms, and they were horrific. It was awful. You didn't want to eat the chicken that you saw, and they were struggling with disease all the time. They had standing structures, and that was their biggest complaint. Was they were getting sick, and it's war torn, so it's hard to keep everything healthy and happy. But what do you do when you have a place that's I don't know, inundated with unease and unrest? How do you manage a farm in that kind of condition? Would you think?
Well, I mean, it's a lot more complicated than when things are at peace. I mean, yeah, we've had numerous visitors from all over the world. Belarusia after Chernobyl blew, they sent their ag minister over here to visit with us, and we've had a lot of these. And what's most amazing, and of course, I've been in Israel as well. And what's amazing on the in Judea and Samaria. Um, Also known as the West Bank, but West Bank means it's part of Jordan. So I use the terms Judea and Samaria, and a lot of these foreign places. I mean, Zimbabwe. I mean, you go almost anywhere in the world, and these folks come here and they say, "Where's your security force? Where are your guards? Where are your sentry? And I said, well, we would just nobody steals the cows, nobody steals the chickens, nobody steals, and all these other cultures, theft, human theft is the number one thing. I mean, that's why in Indochina, in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, they bring their chickens in at night, and then they bring these chickens in and basically sleep in a house to keep them from being stolen, and then they got all this poop and stuff in a house. I mean, it's a crazy thing. So yes, I am well aware, and I honestly the thought of me having to hire, I don't know, 6 people for 24/7 security protection here is just almost sounds insane. But I know a lot of people go through that, and the other thing that I'll say, I am friends with Alan Savory in Zimbabwe, and he went through the upheaval there with running out all the white farmers. He's a white farmer, and
Mm-hmm.
he survived there because he had a staff that he had worked for years to develop relationships within the community. So they actually wanted him to stay. They didn't want him to leave. He was not a typical, in your face, whatever, white farmer, and not that all white farmers are that, but he had put a lot of attention and investment in cultivating a relationship with the neighbors, so that he had a kind of a perimeter,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking here, if things were at run unrest, I would probably put more attention on having potlucks where the neighbors would come over, and we sit around, and so you extend your perimeter out there, where people can kind of watch what's going on, and see what's going on. But the basic principles that we use with farming, uh, work, whether it's unrest or not unrest. It's just the hassle of, having to put money in, in security as opposed to other things. But the principles are identical.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw a lot was whenever the ag team showed up, they had a Western mindset, and the example I always use is there was this major from, and these are farmers, right? These are farm people, and so I would say, hey, what's the market chain here from this pomegranate farmer until the pomegranate gets into somebody's mouth, into somebody's drink? And the major is like, I don't know. Like, why are you messing with it? What is it about our approach? You brought up a bunch of stuff in the Mideast, Judea, Samaria, all those areas. We would go there throughout the entire history of the U.S. and try to teach people how to farm, but using techniques that I don't think resonate with them for whatever reason. We always, you'll hear, we would hear like, oh, if we get their crop big enough, they'll have to hire in migrant pickers. And I'm like, migrant pickers? So I'll go ask these guys. These are Rocky guys. And they would say, there's no crop so big that me and my cousins can't bring it in. We would never, ever, ever hire anybody outside the family. And then he said it, he's like, listen to me, never. We will always bring on our own crop. Yes, I would love to double the size of my crop. Tell me how you think I can do it. I may or may not do it, but never will I hire. And when I write that report, right, because part of my job, it was just, it was as if I had spat in everybody's faces on the ag side, because this was their desperate outcome that they wanted, but it wasn't anything the farmers were willing or planned or intended to do.
Huh. Wow, that is so fascinating, because I did a seminar out in Arkansas. I don't know what there's an Army fort near a college there where I did this presentation,
Mm-hmm.
and this colonel and some other fellows came in for the day. It was a day-long seminar that I did at this community college on sustainable agriculture, livestock sort of stuff. At the end of the day, of course, I don't normally have a contingent of fatigue wearing uniforms at my presentation. So I went back, and of course I wanted to thank him for his service, and I thank you for your service. And I went back to him. I said, I appreciate you being here. What's the deal? He said, well, I'm in charge of a group that's getting ready to go back to Afghanistan and help the farming there. And he said, and here I've sat here today, and I realized everything that I'm being prepped in the U.S. to take there is completely inappropriate. He said, what I've heard today, where you actually build compost on site, you have portable infrastructure, you butcher animals on site, you sell locally. He said, everything I've heard here today is exactly what they need. He said, but I'm going to go there, and I'm going to encourage them to buy machinery they don't need, plant crops they don't eat, and do things that are completely inappropriate. He said, if I could get you to come to the Pentagon, would you be willing to come to the Pentagon and do a presentation for my superior? This guy was a colonel. Okay. So, he's up there. And I said, well, I would be more, I couldn't imagine a more honoring, privileged thing than to come and do that. Well, when he got here and asked, nobody was interested. There was no interest whatsoever. So you'll love this, Pete. So after Chernobyl blew, and you're old enough to remember that, when Chernobyl blew, that nuclear cloud came down across Belarusia, and it finally kind of fagged out over Austria, and so that whole region of at that time, the Soviet Union, they had their very, very segregated ag areas. We go wheat over here, dairy over here, beef over here, potatoes over here. It was extremely, segregated among the Russian, the Soviet Union satellites. Well, Belarusia was the dairy area, and that's where they had the dairy cows. And so when that radioactivity came down, and it came down and it settled in the mammary glands in their udders. It settled in their udders. It didn't settle in the soil so much. It was in the udders. And so the cows were okay, but they couldn't drink the milk because the mammary glands had radioactivity in them. So anyway, as a result, and because, the people, Belarusia, they didn't grow wheat. They didn't grow vegetables. They didn't grow, you know, it was this collective farming system where
Right.
here's where we dairy. Well, the people were starving. You know, they didn't have a broad base of food. And
Right.
so anyway, the U.S. sent, you know, millions and millions of dollars over there of food aid. And here's what here was the entourage. It was the equivalent of our head of the Speaker of the House. So it was the Parliament Speaker of the Parliament. It was the Secretary of Agriculture, and it was the there was a third one. I can't remember what his position was, but he was like the, you know, the head of the Ag Committee of Parliament. Okay.
Sure.
And so these were, you know, they came with their entourage interpreters. They were great. They were such gentlemen, such professionals. They were so cool. And of course they came in their, you know, their black cars and their, you know, translators and stuff. Anyway, when we got done with our farm tour here, the head guy looked at me and he said, the U.S. gave us millions and millions of dollars to solve our food problem. He said, and the day the money landed in our capital, the day the money landed in the bank, every hotel was full of representatives from American companies, Pioneer Seeds, John Deere tractors. And he said, we spent that money on American corporations in no time, spent it all. He said, if we had done what you've showed us here today with electric fence, some water lines, and just, you know, good pasture management, he said, not only would we have fed our people, we would have had enough left over to export. And so what happens is you come to this very, you know, disillusioned state. You sound like you know the score. The disillusioned state is that U.S. foreign aid is essentially subsidies to American companies to spend it in those countries. How those so USAID, all these outfits, they're all about you know, spending American money to American corporations to give these people seeds they don't need, equipment they don't need, buildings they don't need, and it's a complete debacle. And then we wonder why people don't like us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm so glad I get to talk about this with you, because I've always felt like, you know, again, these are farmers that show up. You talked about your colonel guy, right? He runs an ag development team, an ADT, and their goal is to go do this. And these are farm folks, right? So I got to learn to talk to farm folks. And it doesn't matter if you're Iraqi or Afghan or Kansas farmer, you guys all kind of do and say and think the same things, you know? And so I don't presume to tell the person that, you know, how to grow things. So I was being told on our side, hey, look into the greenhouses, because I've got access that they don't have, right? They can't leave the camp, and my job is to leave the camp every day. And so I go out and I start learning about greenhouses. And the first thing that happens is I go up in a helicopter, and our point of view is they're all too stupid to have greenhouses. So I go up in a helicopter, I look, and there's miles of tarp over the farmland, you know, and it's tented so that it will gather water and irrigate a little bit, right? So they're sort of doing their own
miles of tarp, you know, tarpaulins,
tarpaulin, or like you know, plastic sheeting,
okay,
right?
All right.
And so you know, like you might, and I'm talking miles of space, right? So some of it might be on bows, some of it might be on stakes, but it's everywhere, right? They're already using plastic to help them gather water or protect crops from the sun or whatever it is that they're doing. Then I go see a guy, he's got a farm, and it's like an ancient farm right on the edge of the Tigris River. And I'm like, hey, tell me about greenhouses. Would that help you? And the guy's like, no, I have a greenhouse. It's nature. So, and you'll appreciate this. He's like, on the ground, I'll have a ground crop. Maybe it's alfalfa, something like that. And he flood irrigates, right? And I'm like, okay. He's like, above that, I have a taller crop. Maybe I'll put in corn or something else. Above that, I have a fruit tree crop. And above that, all in the same land, he had dates. And so he's like, this captures, he's like, it feels different inside of this little part of my farm. It wasn't a big farm at all, maybe an acre. And he's like, that captures the energy that's here in the area, and it keeps it moisture. You'll notice when you walk out or in to this area, it feels different because of the tiered structure of his farm. And I wrote about this, and again, it was like I had said that, you know, all these people from America are stupid, but that, and I don't care if it works or not, that guy believed that this was the way to go. So he'd have like apricots, you know, some kind of taller to leafier thing, and then the ground crop. And he's like, I do great out here. And he had more birds than anywhere else. He'd really built something that I thought, from my untrained eye, was pretty remarkable.
Wow. So the whole ecology, you could sense the energy of the whole ecology was just abundance rather than scarcity.
Yes.
In a pretty rough farming. I mean, a pretty rough place to grow stuff. That's well, you know, that's a permaculture concept. That concept of tiering. You know, they call it stacking, vertically stacking enterprises. And of course, that's a lot what we do here with animals. You know, we run the cows, run the egg mobiles behind them. The chickens then spread out the cow patties, eat out the fly larvae, and then we run the broilers behind that, and the meat chickens, and then we can run the turkeys. And so you run the turkeys, the chickens, the egg layers, the cows, and suddenly, you know, you're up there in the $25,000 to $30,000 an acre because you're stacking complementary enterprises across the landscape, and all the infrastructure is mobile. So you don't even have any manure to haul, you don't have any machinery, and the infrastructure is all mobile, so that you don't even have to own the land. One of the key things that we promote here is, by having mobile infrastructure, it takes the land cost out of the farming equation. The biggest cost in farming is land acquisition, is the capital to buy the land. But if you don't have to buy the land, and a lot of places you can't even own the land. I mean, right. You know, communist China, you can't own the land. In Mongolia, you know, you can't own the land. But if you have portable infrastructure to where your farm is mobile, now suddenly you can place your farm, and I'm using farm in a broad. You can place your production anywhere. You don't have to own the land, and that's a game changer. And there's not a square foot of ag land in the world that wouldn't benefit from pastured chickens or ducks or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and so the thing I learned was to ask these guys what they need, you know, because we would come up with these solutions. And again, there's a and it's the thing. It takes a while to learn all this stuff, and a lot of times after you're done doing it, and you start to put the bigger pieces together. And this is not meant to be a political statement, but there is a political lean to how we care for farmers. And so we would do things like, oh, we're going to start a co-op here. And you had to report positively about the co-op. If you didn't, they got mad. The Americans would get mad at you. And so one of the things I would do, this is not because I'm picking on a political party, I'm picking on a policy. So I'm like, okay, well, when you guys aren't here being wined and dined and spending our money to feed you again, these are Americans that come out to see the co-op and how great the co-op is, right? So this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, a satisficing behavior. So they would visit from the State Department or USAID or USAG, like, wow, look at this great co-op, wow, you know. And then I would go there the next day and I'd be like, hey, where are the farmers, you know? And then I would go see where the farmers, because I knew who the farmers were, and I would go see those guys. Like, tell me what you did. Like, oh, well, we came to that. You know, Muhammad asked us to come because you guys were coming, and we wanted to put on a good show, you know. But honestly, I don't go there for anything. And I'm like, you never go there? You know, and so I would ask them, like, what mattered to them? And they're like, if you guys want to help us, feed and seed. That's all I need, feed and seed. You know, it was something simple like that. It wasn't anything complicated. And when I asked about, like, yeah, would you guys all chip in on a tractor and use it together? And then they all would, like, laugh in my face. They're like, no, like, that's not what we do here. And if we had a tractor, it'd become a thing we fought over and killed each other over. This goes back to the greenhouses. They're like, we compete for those greenhouses because they're worth money if we sell them, but no one's going to grow a bigger crop in them. And sure enough, you would see that over and over again. So when we try to help these farmers, how do you take a region that is culturally so different, even if farming's kind of farming everywhere, how do you teach someone, or how do you figure out what they're willing to do? Because that's the other thing is you're making a seasonal bet. And if we say, oh, give it more or less water, don't flood irrigate, drip irrigate, it has to work, because if it doesn't work, we're not going to cover that bet for them.
Yeah, yeah, that is so well said. I mean, it's a favorite question of mine. How do you help somebody? I had this spring, actually, we were going to have a bunch of nuns from Tanzania come, and so they were running a charity hospital in Tanzania. This nunnery, this mission. And they'd had a bunch of Western ag, help, and they said our animals are all sick, and everything was put the animals on concrete, medicate them, bring feed to them, and they said our animals are sick. Anyway, they were desperate for something, because they were trying. Their goal was to have the farm subsidize the hospital ministry. I mean, their real goal was a charity hospital in Tanzania, and they wanted to be self-financed by running this farm. Well, the farm was draining everything away because everything was sick. It wasn't working. Well, they stumbled across Polyface on YouTube or something. As soon as they saw it, all these nuns says, yeah, there's the answer. That's what we need. We need to get these animals out, move them around. We can control them with electric fence. We can get water pipe, and get water to their paddocks and stuff. And so the head one contacted me, and we were going to do a 2-day seminar here this spring for them. But with Trump, and I'm not opposed to Trump, just with one of the fallouts of Trump being elected is it's becoming very, very difficult for foreigners to get here, even for good stuff like this. They just can't get, so they couldn't get here. But I have been told this over and over again by groups around the world that have gotten Western U.S. help, and it's all Tyson based. It's industrial scale, industrial houses, and these folks don't need that. Labor is cheap. They've got a lot of vegetation, and a lot of talent, frankly. I mean, in Spain, they're now actually doing shepherding mentorship, where you can go for 3 months with those Basque shepherds and learn how to shepherd. And I mean, it is nuanced to the point where they actually put them over here in the morning and over here in the afternoon, because there's a different plant that the sheep need in the morning versus the one they need in the afternoon. And I mean, that's indigenous wisdom and indigenous knowledge. And our Western culture, we've been doing this a long time. I mean, I went, Teresa and I went for a trip to Williamsburg, the museum, Williamsburg. It's a huge, and I got to meet George Wythe. They, from time to time, they have costume, the people who actually take on the character of this historical figure. George Wythe was Thomas Jefferson's teacher at William and Mary College. So if you talk to George Wythe, you can understand a lot about Thomas Jefferson, where he was coming from. And anyway, so at the George Wythe house, I went in, and there was George Wythe, and he was there. He does this impersonation all over the world, George Wythe. And so man, this is cool. I'm gonna have a chance to talk to George Wythe. And so of course, other people would come in. They'd spend about a minute and then leave, But I stayed for the hour, and I engaged him in a conversation. I said, So what do you think about the Indians? What's your thought? He says, they're just savages, bunch of barbarians. I said, really? I said, well, they have a language. They have all the things they need to live. They have canoes that boats they get around in. They make treaties with each other. They do fight each other, but they also have treaties, and alliances and all. I went there, and he said, but they don't powder their wigs. They don't drive in chariots. They don't have cobblestone roads. I said, I know. He said they don't have Robert's rules of law. Of order, for parliamentary procedure. I know, but they have a talking stick they pass around. They smoke this peace pipe. They come to consensus. So you can see how I'm interacting with him. And tell me, Pete, he ate it up. He didn't. He wasn't used to somebody engaging him like this. But anyway, at the end of the day, at the end of the session, he finally said, with a bit of a grin, he says, "Well, history may prove me wrong, but that's just what I think."
Mm.
And for me, it was so fascinating to get into the mind. We have been condescending and disrespectful of other cultures for a long, long time. This didn't just happen, when U.S. aid started. It's a natural outgrowth of breaking our treaties with the Indians. It's a natural outgrowth of slavery. It's a natural outgrowth of all these things. And I love America. I'm an absolute, patriotic, reverential. I cry when the veterans come at July 4th parade. Tears are coming down my face. I love that. But it doesn't mean we're perfect, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't do better. We should do better.
Well, that's why I'm interested in this conversation with you, because you understand the farming part of it, and our desire is to help these folks. And because I watched us not help them and force them to do things, I developed this axiom and it applies to like our efforts to help women, to help ag people in these far-flung places. And it's, you cannot reliably improve the condition of someone you refuse to understand the condition of. And that's like the whole thing. Like, what do you need? And I would go to these farmers. So we would have this assumption that there was a fight over water, because some guy's got a Chevy 350 motor attached to a water pump, and he would dump water into the irrigation ditches. And so our assumption was that there was a problem. And I would go way inland and be like, how do you get water? And like, oh, I talked to Jeff on the river, and on my scheduled day, they had a whole system. Joel. It was all there. Or like, these guys need help bringing their crop in. No, they don't. They have it under control. Here's how they do it. And so one of the guys explained how pomegranate works, right? Because we didn't know, and we didn't bother to know, right? So what they would do is decades-old relationships with the broker family, with the farmer family, and the brokers would come down, they'd look in the valley, look at the pomegranates and say, you know what, I'll take the whole lot of it and I will harvest it myself, and here's the cost. Or they would say, I want a quarter acre, but you got to bring it to market. And these guys, this is 100% true. Like we were on the patrol, and this is a far-flung place. No electricity, no roads. It's just rugged as it's like the surface of Mars with really good farming. We see this guy driving an old Toyota van, like a minivan from like 85, right? And on the top of it, he has ratchet-strapped live goats, screaming. They're screaming because they're ratchet-strapped to this vehicle. And inside the van, as high as you could make it, where you couldn't put two more pomegranates in, the entire thing was full of pomegranates. And that's how he brought his crop to market. And so either they would combine and rent a truck, or they would do whatever it took to satisfy whatever the broker agreed to them with. And so they had a system. Could it be improved? Absolutely. Could you get robbed on that road by the Taliban? Absolutely. And so they had to work in a way that they were allowed, because the Taliban was prime there. Like, we couldn't protect them every day of their life. And that security changed how they farmed, how they harvested, how they went to market, all of that. And because we didn't bother to know that, we could never reliably help those folks.
Wow. That is such an amazing story. When I was in Israel, I'll tell you this. I was in Israel for about 10 days, and I was there talking to farmers. So there are about 56 farmers that are holding the entire hundreds of square miles in Judea and Samaria in zone C. So there's three zones: Zone A, B, and C. Zone A is Palestinian, Zone B is both, and Zone C is Israeli. And they're not clearly marked. It's not like there's fences or survey ribbons or anything. And so it's almost like somebody put the map on the wall and just threw stuff at it. Well, this will be A, this will be B, this will be C. And so it's a hodgepodge. And of course, all the Palestinians want to kill, or not all of them, but generally the Palestinians just want to kill the Jews. They don't recognize Israel. They don't recognize the Jewish ability to exist. And so back when the Oslo Accords were signed, Israel and A, B, and C zones were created. Israeli farmers went into those areas as outposts to establish Israeli control in these very remote, hostile outposts. And so I was on these farms, and every one of them had 24/7 security. And they had where I'm going with this, most of them had sheep, and they had these were large places. They were 3,000 acres. So they'd have, 500 ewes, 600 ewes. They were big operations, but because when the sun went down and it got dark, the Palestinians would come and shoot their sheep or steal them or whatever. They felt like they had to bring the sheep in to the farm hub every night to a great big barn. Where they could, protect them, control them. Yeah. And as a result, listen to this. As a result, this is the only place I've ever been in the world where the lambs did not nurse the ewes. When the ewes would lamb, they'd take the lambs away, put them in a nursery on wire floor, feed them, the equivalent of milk replacement, some, lamb Enfamil, and half of the lambs died. They were all basically averaging 50% mortality, very sickly, very poor, stinky, smelly, pathogenic. And it wasn't until my last day there, finally, I'd been there for 9 days, 8 days, 9 days on these various farms, and it struck me. So we sat down, we took a pencil, and I said, how much does your feed cost you to feed these in the barn? How much time does it take to bring the flock in? The reason that they separated the lambs was because the ewes were having to walk so far out to pasture that the lambs would slow them down, and they couldn't get out to the far reaches and get back in a day. And so I said, so 50% mortality. In other words, when you make a budget with losing half your lambs, having to feed them, all the labor bringing them in, you create these expenses. I said, so why can't you hire 2 guys at night to just leave the flock out there to be security? And they never thought of that. Because they were just thinking, I've got to bring them back to the fort. I've got to get back to the fort. They were not thinking how they could substitute a couple of AK-47s or whatever, a couple of gun-toting security for the fort. But that's a perfect example of most of us are so close to our problems, we can't really get out of them because we're so close to the problem. So it takes sometimes an outside pair of eyes, but the outside pair of eyes can only be helpful if it takes the time to think through the problem to where you have a contextual answer to the context of the situation. And I think that story speaks perfectly to the frustration that you felt there in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, and I should say I'm not omnipotent. I made all the mistakes, and there are people with me that help me figure these things out. But yeah, I did see this common thing where we would prescribe a problem before we ever got there and bring the solution. Oh, what you need is drip irrigation. Like in this multi-hectare field, and there's one little drip irrigation system, and they're dutifully employing it, but that's not what they do to make money, And then you would see these fields that were shut down, you ask, like, is this thing lying fallow? Why aren't you working this land? You know, and then they would have their farmer excuses that they had. But even to get them to talk about that, I had to build trust with them so that whenever I showed up, they're like, oh, here's that guy who talks about farming. It's my turn to talk to him about whatever. And I didn't even realize they were doing that they were talking not behind my back, but when I wasn't around, because they all know each other. They all have cell phones. And so as I built familiarity, I could talk more quickly and they could sort of explain their problem. I had no solutions, but I could at least explain to our side, hey, U.S. Ag, hey, Department of State, because here's the other side of that is, and I'll just be hard on state and ag and USAID. All their projects brief well. Oh yeah, if we don't do this, 100,000 people are going to die, and we're going to give everybody greenhouses. You know, meanwhile the governor, then it's like we'll call him like a county governor. The county governor out there, you know, in that part of Baghdad province, he's like, hey, would you guys stop giving out those greenhouses? Because here's what happens. Everybody comes to complain about either why they got it, why they didn't get it, how they get it. And I spend so not only would we screw up the farmers, we would screw up the government, where we would absorb the governor's day because we had no idea who to give these things to. And the governor said, you know, if you want to give these things out, that's fine, but let me handle it. Because I know who the farmers are. I know who the tribes are. And boy, oh boy, Joel, we hated that. We hated that idea of letting an Iraqi manage this thing, even though it was like Iraqis forward, unless we don't like that idea, because that doesn't brief well.
Wow. Yeah. But they're the ones that are on the ground that have the whole cultural thing. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were to go to a place like Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, because you've been to these other places, where do you start? Like, how do you keep yourself from being too westernized? How do you maintain the ability to listen and then maybe identify something within their world that is real? Like, hey, why don't you hire some security for your sheep?
So I guess a lot of it is just keeping it simple. These things, we Westerners, we love our technology. You know, we want to run AI, drones, and everything all over places. And when you come down to actual land management, it's really pretty simple. You've got to manage water. You've got to manage carbon. You've got to manage vegetation. And how do you manage? You can do it with shepherding. You can do it with electric fence. You can do it with well, in Zimbabwe they call it kraals. That's kind of a South African for a corral. And for example, one of the things that's worked very, very well there is, for example, they'll make a corral to bring the animals in, and these are made with existing vegetation, you know, bushes and branches and stuff, and they just basically make a square with, you know, a windrow around it that the sheep, the goats, and stuff can't get out of, and that protects them from lions and you know, predators overnight. Okay, then you know, one person can kind of watch that and be aware of what's going on, and so what happens is that spot, because of all the urine and manure on it, it becomes incredibly fertile. So what you do is you don't A, keep using it, or B, you know, just walk away from it. You then use that to cultivate some extremely high dollar or hard to grow place. So you run some water to it, and now you can grow, you know, some whatever, a really high value, nutritious crop that is hard to grow outside, you know, because it needs something else. Right. And that becomes a really targeted, you know, highly nutritious place. So, and if you do that, you know, if once a week you make another one that's, you know, half an acre or something, and everybody kind of, you know, puts their animals together and they all use this. Well, in a year, at half an acre times 365 days, in a year, you've got 180 acres of really highly fertile ground that you can start using for a real high value crop that takes really good soil to grow in. And so, those are the simplicity of it. Swales, a simple blade to duct water so that it doesn't run down a valley. I mean, I had we had a Mexican. We've only had one apprentice from Mexico years and years ago, and his family owned. They were in Sonora, which is northern Mexico, there below Arizona. Very dry. I mean, 4 inches of rain a year. I mean, it's high desert,
Right.
and they had I don't know what 50,000 acres. They were a wealthy Mexican family, and old Mexico, old blood, and anyway, he came as an apprentice, was here for a year, and went back, and because of being here, when they had a crew of I don't know what, three or four cowboys, and when they weren't doing anything, he would take them out, and they would just in an hour they could just pile up a little rock dam in the bottom of these arroyos, these draws, these eroding big gullies, and and they could make like a 3-foot high dam across there. And he said within 1 year they suddenly had all these green terraces. They looked like golf greens, because all that did was slow the water down.
Yep.
It let the water drop its sediment in that spot. The rocks let the water go through. So it wasn't an impermeable dam. It was a permeable dam, but it held when you got a torrent of rain, it held it back far enough. He said, if we could just do this over the whole place, we would, double our production in a year if we could just start so erosion is a big problem.
Yep.
Water is a big problem, and fertility is a big problem. So if you can deal with those at a very simple elementary level, they don't need Tyson chicken houses. They don't need American beef feedlots. And so to me, keep it simple. And run it down to the most basic, landscape need of the time, and then stay humble. Don't go in there arrogantly and figure these folks are just barbarians and savages because they carry stuff around in a ox cart instead of a 18-wheeler.
Yeah, and by the way, ox carts work great. That's why they exist. Or like the wagon that has 4 old automobile tires on it and a tiny little donkey.
Yeah.
They move a lot of stuff that way. All right, so here's another one, and this kind of goes to your keeping it simple thing, right? So we want the Afghan farmers to grow grapes. They love grapes. Grapes are okay for them to eat. Everything's good about that, and we want them to grow it on a trellis, right? Pete, why won't these farmers grow? Are they too stupid? Is our attitude? And I'm like, I don't know. Let me go find out. I start talking with these guys, and look, farmers, they're really practical. So they do this, they look around and they go, here, Pete, here's why we aren't doing this. In the Quran, we're supposed to grow grapes a certain way. If we put it on a trellis, that means we're working with you. That means the Taliban's going to come because now you put us on Front Street. The Taliban's going to come knocking on our door, and they're going to know that we're partnered with you. So guess what? We understand that trellises are better. We're not dumb. We grow grapes all the time. You don't have to tell us to grow grapes. But this is an aside, but we do the same thing with the women. We're like, there's a thing called your menstrual cycle. Here's how you handle it. Like, we fucking invent the goddamn period, and then the women are like, yeah, we know. We've had periods, so we take these grapes that they already know about. They know how to grow them, but the political environment doesn't allow them to grow grapes without causing themselves extra struggle. And again, like when I report this back, this is all part of how I learned how to deal with these farmers. I don't care if it's true or not. It's true to these folks, and they want to stay alive. and they don't have a reliance on their government like we do, right? They're farmers. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They mostly want to be left alone. But we were desperate for them to just do what they were told and grow those damn grapes on those damn trellises. Hurry up, get to it so you can become rich growing grapes.
Yeah. So here's my thought. And I'm just brainstorming here. I don't have all the answers, but I'm just brainstorming. So imagine if instead of viewing a Western typical, vineyard trellis, if instead, let's say, for example, they planted a tree. If they planted a tree, and then trellis the grapevine up the tree, would the Taliban view that as a trellis, or would that be a benign way to move? Because look, in nature around here, I mean, we're in Virginia Shenandoah Valley. You walk out in any edge of the woods and you'll see massive grapevines. I mean, they're that big around and they're way up these trees. Grapes, and they've got grapes up, muscadines. They got grapes way up there, and so grapes and trees work really, really well together. And so if you this is one of these permaculture concepts that you make a living trellis. You simply plant trees, 2 or 3 years, let them get a head start, and then you don't want the grapevine to overrun the tree, so you keep it pruned back. But now suddenly you're not running a quote unquote trellis. You're simply mimicking nature's pattern of a grapevine on a tree. And if you keep the tree pruned up and the crown and the canopy stays high, then suddenly you've got enough light to the grapes, and the tree works, the grapes work, and it all works together. So those are the kind of things that I would bring. I would absolutely not argue. I would not argue. Like you said, this is the way it is. You can't argue.
Yeah.
So what you do is you try to figure a workaround. You try to figure something that doesn't classify as the bad thing. How can we do this? How can we circumvent in a way that doesn't classify as a bad thing? I mean, like right here in the U.S., we're constantly dealing with food safety regulations. I mean, you almost can't pick your belly button without a government license anymore. And so many of us are trying to figure out how do we conduct a transaction that is not in commerce, because in commerce is when the government comes after you. So if you can figure out a way to do a transaction that's not in commerce, then you kind of come outside that. And so anyway, I'm just trying to think through, an alternative approach that would allow them to grow the grapes without a Western looking classification.
That's a great idea. And just to, again, take the Western mind out, because we always think of separation of church and state here, at least in America, but it's not true. Like when I was there, the government was called the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, so Islam is in the title of it. It says Allah Akbar on the Iraqi flag. So, it's important there. So if you go to them and say, how does it work in Islam? Is there a tree that's sacred? Can we grow grapes in that tree? Because they'll have rules on even just using water. There's a specialist who is the Islamic Water Authority for these valleys in Afghanistan. And so understanding that person has a role and not circumventing that person it's a smart thing. But because we don't think about religion as being part of the solution, it got us in trouble quite a lot because we couldn't account for it. So that's interesting to talk about. Like, how do you make a non-traditional trellis, a natural trellis, and that permaculture style? That's fantastic, man. That's a new thing for me to add to the quiver, because there is ways to do it. And what they primarily did was on their earthen homes and structures is they kind of just laid it on the ground and it kind of just spread out. At least where I was, different place, different rules, but that's real interesting.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and if you go in with a complete respect and honor of cultural differences, and not this overriding "I'm smarter than you are" approach. I've been asked to go all over the world to do things, like these nuns in Tanzania. You know, they ask about me coming there, and I am paranoid of this idea. I'm the great white man and I have your answer. I'm just paranoid of that. So what we do here at our farm, Pete, often when we have like missionary groups, or I mean, I had three mayors from after the Bosnia the war over there in Bosnia during Clinton. Um, I had three mayors from Bosnia, Slovenia, you know, come, and they toured here. It was fantastic, and what I've found is that if they can come here, you know, the Bible says where there's no vision, the people perish. So if they can come here and see it, then they can go back and, well, they might not use this material, but they'll use that material. They might not use this pump, but they'll use that pump. And they then adapt the principle. I had a king come, a king from Kenya. So are you there? Uh-oh. Where'd you go, Pete? Hello, Pete. Are you there? There you are.
I think I'm back.
I think you are back.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Sorry about that. Working on the phone.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah. I think where we left off was I was saying that what we've found is that if we can bring, I mean, like we had mayors from Bosnia and stuff here, and they want me to come there. And the problem is it takes too long for me to get in their context. So what we've done with our seminars and different things, we've said, look, you send your two best to us, and we'll scholarship them in free for a seminar as part of our, you know, tithing and giving and stuff. And that way you can come and you can see. We had a king from he was from Kenya, and they elect their kings there. So he's not king by blood. He's elected, but then he's king for life once he's elected. And he came with his entourage. Wonderful, just a wonderful, warm guy. He wanted to do pigs, and his pigs kept getting sick. He was trying to do them in a confinement situation. He came and saw our pigs, how we do it with electric fence and stuff. Anyway, I heard back from him about 2 years after he left here, and he is in, as they say, he's in the pink. I mean, his pigs are fantastic. He's doing great. I mean, he's changing the whole community just because he came and saw a way to run pigs, that wasn't like Smithfield hog factories. Yeah. But if you've never seen it, and he wasn't using everything exactly like we do, but it was enough. It was enough. He got the principle. It was close enough that he was able to run them. And so we always encourage these mission groups and stuff like that. Come here, let us show you what we're doing, and then you use your local materials, your local knowledge, your local climate, all the things that you know, and you then customize it and adapt it to your situation. And I find that is way more whatever honoring and respectful than me coming in on the airplane and all right, I've got your
Yep.
answer.
Yeah. I've predetermined your problem and delivered you an answer. You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I was in Bosnia and I met a lot of farmers. This is when I first started learning about all this stuff. And those guys could do amazing things, and they farmed in a very traditional fashion. A plow and some kind of draft animal, whatever animal they had, and that's how they did it. They grew their own smoke, they grew their own wine or Slivovitz. They did all that stuff themselves,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and didn't want our help, And a lot of these guys were Muslims, but they were like Jack Muslims, So they weren't the best, but they had their rules and they had to abide by them. And it was fine. So I appreciate that. I got one final thing I want to ask you about. You talked about water as being one of the key elements. And I know we would have like these farmer classes, like a lunch and learn. Come on in and learn with us. And we have the best intent, great people that are trying to do the right thing. So I'm not saying anything bad about these folks, but I would go back because I learned to do this. I would go back the next day and say, "What did you learn yesterday?" And the farmer would be like, "I don't know. I'm supposed to put less water on my pomegranates, or I'm not supposed to flood irrigate, or I'm not supposed to do this." And I would say something like, "Well, how much less water on your pomegranates?" And the guy would be like, I don't know. And then he would hold his hand about 18 inches apart, that much less. Because what these guys do to irrigate is they kind of knock a hole in the side of the irrigation trench that they got going by their house when it's their time to do it. And then they patch it back up and the water moves on down the road. By the way, they also use check dams to elevate the level of the water in a certain area, and so we would get over involved in those things. So all of that is familiar, but we didn't have a way to communicate with them clearly. And they're not stupid, but these are not people Western educated. So we didn't know how to say, why don't you, instead of the way you're doing it now, do it for 20 minutes less? And again, who's going to protect that decision? Maybe those pomegranates in that field grow the way they do because of the way they move. So how do you help someone manage water, whether you're telling them to drip it, not flood irrigate, whatever it is? How do we learn how to do that better?
Well, we like we learn everything. We do it by observation, and you do it incrementally. You make very, very little changes. You don't make sweeping changes. And you could probably speak to this too. That too often our Western advice is big changes. Big changes. I've learned that some of the biggest returns on investment are little changes. And if you change incremental, and so most of the time when you start changing big, you have catastrophes or you have unexpected consequences when you start changing things great big. But if you can go in and make little tweaks, little changes, and observe, well, I changed this. What does that do? I changed this. What does that do? And I mean, like I'm thinking, for example, back 40 years ago when Israel started planting all the trees on their side of the green line, and they couldn't get them to grow. It was so dry. And so what they did, they just started, how do we get more water here? And they literally just took a shovel, a trowel. And when I was in Israel here, I saw this guy doing this on his place. It reminded me of it. And they just took a trowel and they just made a little funnel uphill, and a little dam on the downhill side of the tree, and that tripled the water coming to that little seedling. And it was the difference between flourishing and dying. And those kinds of very simple little things, especially in a place where labor is cheap, is just I mean, that beats all the equipment and petroleum and diesel fuel you can imagine. Just little things like that to help that that come in. And so I think for me, the best way to help someone is not to try to upset their apple cart or upset their pomegranate cart, but to actually um, make a tiny change and then see what that does and observe it. Sit down on a bucket and watch.
Yeah.
As my friend Ian Mitchell ends in South Africa, he says if you want to know how to move your cows, get a case of beer and take your case of beer and sit down and watch the cows and
Yeah.
drink your beer and watch the cows. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so I think sometimes these folks don't trust their own intuition. They don't trust they've been told they're backward. They've been told they're in a developing country. They've been told they're in this hardship or whatever. And can't is in their vocabulary. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough land. They don't have enough rain. They don't have enough this and scarcity. They're just living in this time of scarcity. And if you can come in and say, you've got tons of potential here, and let's make little changes and observe those little changes, and when we get on a positive trajectory, let's run that. Don't start something else. Let's run that trajectory down until we can't creatively think of another way to do that trajectory. Then we'll go over and we'll look at this and we'll look at that.
Yeah.
And that's how you kind of grow your help into the context.
Yeah. All right, one more real quick thing I'll say to you, and then just let's throw your social media stuff out so folks can find you. But so when I'm in Afghanistan, they had these irrigation swats. They called them karezes. Basically, it was shallow, maybe like, 18 inches deep and 290 degrees. So more of a chute than like a slit, that kind of thing. So very boxy looking. And in the bottom of this thing, the water's moving pretty fast. It's all going downhill. There was a towel, like a regular old-fashioned style towel. And I called it like a river blanket. And I could not figure out from all these farmers why so many of them had these towels inside of their irrigation ditch as you went down the hill, farm to farm. There it was. And I never could figure it out. So maybe one day you'll have an answer for me on that. Maybe you have an answer now. But it was just like you'll see the most interesting practices from these guys.
So my question is, when it went through those 290-degree elbows, was the water running a little bit faster than it normally did?
It's just a channel. That's what the 90s were. Okay. Very boxy channel is all. So it's not like a chicane. It's just going straight down. But I did think about like maybe its job was to cause a ripple, and the towel would just sit there. It wouldn't go anywhere, and so the water would just go over the top of it for whatever reason. It was kind of a magical thing.
I'm wondering if it was for erosion. I mean, if the water is accelerating and moving through that dirt ditch, it would tend to cut and build up in that little slot.
That could be.
And so a towel in the bottom would keep it from picking up dirt on the bottom of the ditch.
Yeah. Well, tell everybody how they find you. This is Joel. He's super awesome. You guys heard him talk about all this stuff. All his content is great. Watch him wherever you can. Where do folks find you? And thank you very much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah. So my everything is Polyface Farms, POLYFACE, Polyface Farms. I have a blog. I do a podcast with Dr. Sina McCullough every week. And of course, I've written 16 books. Number 17 is coming out this year. And we do a video curriculum. We do a lot of stuff here at the farm. Tours, seminars, educational things, all sorts of stuff. But everything is Polyface Farms. We do ship nationally. So if anybody wants some good food, we'll ship it to you. And it's just been an honor and a delight to be with you, Pete. You are a trove of great stories. I can't tell you how much I enjoy those kinds of real life, personal, things. Our family in 1959 and 60 lost a farm in Venezuela, South America. We'd been there 12 years farming. Not farming all the time, but Dad wanted to farm in a developing country, and we got caught in a junta, a coup d'état, yeah, and lost everything. Dad was 39 when he lost everything, and we ended up having to return to the U.S. So our family has some real heart for other cultures, other ways of doing things, and it's just a real treat to talk to someone who's encountered this and realize a lot of times, the enemy is us.
Man. Yeah.
And so,
but that's good news, because if we can calm down, we can fix these things, right?
Yeah.
We just gotta,
absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right, well, yeah, take care. Have a good time. Everybody else, I'll see you in a little bit.